Every day we take on the ordinary, sometimes challenging tasks of work, school, parenting, relationships, and just managing our busy lives. How do we navigate these tasks successfully? And what can send us off course? Science offers an explanation. We all need a set of core capabilities that we can develop with practice over time. Scientists call them executive function or self-regulation skills, and they help us to focus on what's important, to plan ahead, set goals, and meet them. They help us deal with whatever life throws at us and still keep heading where we need to go. They help us resist impulsive behaviors.
Stop.
And change course when we need to. No one is born with executive function skills, but everyone can build them. We build them through a lifetime of making connections within and among the regions of the brain. Our brains begin life with billions of neurons, rapidly connecting to each other as we experience the world around us, making trillions of connections in just a few years. Early simple circuits form a foundation that more complex circuits and skills build on as we grow and have new experiences. These complex circuits, built throughout childhood and reaching across vast regions of the brain, make our core capabilities possible. The more we use these connections, the stronger and faster they become. That's why practice is so important. When we are children, we practice these skills by playing games, learning teamwork, adjusting to new rules. We continue to develop these skills in adolescence by managing school and other things like work, sports, music, and relationships. When we practice executive function skills, circuits rapidly connect the prefrontal cortex to other parts of the brain. These circuits act like an air traffic control system in the brain. They manage incoming information and help us respond with intention, not on impulse. Threatening or stressful experiences activate different circuits, and those trigger automatic responses: fight, flight, or freeze. We need automatic responses for survival, but if stress is constant, these automatic fight or flight circuits become stronger and faster than our more productive intentional circuits, the ones we use for executive function and self-regulation. For anyone under stress, it's hard to call on intentional skills. If we've been experiencing serious stress from our earliest years, the stress caused by poverty, violence, or addiction, a chaotic environment, it's even harder. Under lots of stress every day, it's harder still. The key is counterbalancing those automatic responses by building up our intentional ones, by building strong executive function skills. The good news is these core capabilities can be strengthened. How? By redesigning our systems so they reduce the sources of stress in people's lives, by simplifying how services are provided to families, helping them meet basic needs and building on strengths, because small successes lead to bigger ones. With less stress, we can practice the skills we already have and build new circuits for the intentional responses we need. Stronger brain circuits are built through practice in situations that matter. That's true for children, it's true for adolescents, and it's true for adults. Helping children build skills gives them a strong foundation for all that comes later. Helping teens build their skills propels them into greater success as adults and parents. And helping adult caregivers build their core capabilities ensures success at work, stable homes, and responsive relationships for the next generation. When our communities work together to help children and adults build these skills, we create a positive cycle as one generation passes them on to the next. And that helps us all.
This image shows the progression of a maturing brain. If you notice at age 5, there's a small blue portion located at the back of the brain, and that blue slowly moves forward towards the prefrontal cortex until the brain is fully mature around 20 years old. This means that the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that helps us make decisions and self-regulate, is the last to mature. This lack of neural connections is why many of our students are unable to self-regulate or make the best choices. So it's important to remember that in the video that we just watched, the more we use the connections, the stronger and faster they become. That's why practice is so important. This is why we have group plans and teaching and reteaching of expectations, because the more plans and expectations are practiced, the stronger those neural connections in our brains become, and the faster we can recall that information in the future. It's also really important to note that our experiences are what build strong connections, not just our words. So, for example, if we're asking a student who's running in the hallway to go back and walk, it's much more effective at building those neural connections than simply telling them to walk. The previous slide shows how our brain develops from the back to the front. So information comes into our brain from the back, where you can see emotions, reactions, and responses are located. If the information initiates a fight, flight, or freeze response, then the information is not able to move from the back of the brain to the front of the brain where decisions are made. So the video said that if stress is constant, then these automatic fight, flight, or freeze circuits become stronger and faster than our more productive intentional circuits, the ones that we use for self-regulation. So if we think about our students who have had adverse childhood experiences or trauma, the part of their brain with the strongest neural connections is their reacting brain. So that's why it's so important for us to help our students feel safe by improving their sense of belonging through our connecting activities and continuing to build our relationships. It will help them make those neural connections from their prefrontal cortex and become more reflective and better able to self-regulate. Overt defiance can be one of the toughest behaviors to deal with, but a few examples of what this could look like might be a student refusing to participate, throwing their materials off their desk, knocking over their chair, or maybe even eloping out of the room. But if we're seeing these behaviors, then it usually means that something has triggered that student to go into that fight, flight, or freeze mode, and we have to figure out how to get them out of that without escalating the student even more.
On this slide, we want you to journal a few experiences that you can recall of overt defiance in your classroom.
When we talked about the brain earlier, that really explains the why behind overt defiance, but now we want to go over some strategies to try if you have a student that is displaying overt defiance. Our first one is to be a yes person, which really just means trying to say yes as much as you can. There are some situations where this won't work, but an example of this might be if a student asks to read their library book during math time, instead of saying, no, it's time for math right now, put that away, try saying, you can read your library book during our library time, but we have to finish our math lesson first. That kind of leads into our next one, which is using first in language. It really simplifies your directions into two-step directions so students don't get frustrated or feel lost. For example, you could say first get out your iPad, then click on Google Classroom, or finish number 1 first, then you can go to the restroom. Our next one is chunking assignments. This just means that you're cutting down on how much of the assignment they do at one time. So the goal is still to do the entire assignment, but during that period, the student may only focus on the first 2 problems. It can be really intimidating to look at a blank assignment knowing that the entire thing has to be completed before the end of the period. So if we break it up, or we fold the paper in half, or we pick out a specific section to complete, then that assignment seems less daunting to the student. Our next one is really just a tip, but ultimatums typically do not work. When a student hears an ultimatum, their focus will shift to whatever that consequence is that goes along with the ultimatum. So instead of shifting it to what the expected behavior is. For instance, if you say, you can get started on your work or you can go to the office, then that begins a power struggle, and it really just increases the frustration for both the student and the teacher, because the student has already made up in their mind that they're not going to do their work, so they'd rather just go to the office because they know that's where you're going to send them if they don't get started. So instead we have to go back to, why is the student refusing? Is it too hard? Do they not know how to start, and trying to figure out what you can do to help that student before it ever gets to that point of sending them to the office. Our next one is giving 2 choices within the classroom. If you have a student that is defiant, then come up with a relevant second option for them to do in the classroom. This does not mean that we give them the option to do work or a preferred activity like iPad time or computer time or Play-Doh time or coloring. This means that they are doing a relevant second option based off of the assignment that's given. So for instance, if they're supposed to be using manipulatives to represent 10s and 1s, then give them the option to write it on their dry erase board instead, or write it on a piece of paper. These strategies don't have to just be used for an overt defiant student. They can be used on any kid. But always remember to close that learning cycle by giving positive reinforcement when they do what you're asking them to do.